Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening to celebrate the publication of the first book in a brand new series by Kieran Larwood, illustrated by Todd-Stanton. It's called Dungeon Runners Level 1 Hero Trail. The title gives you a clue as to what is going to happen in this book, and we'll be talking more about that in a little while. Now, you know that Kieran is the author of the well-loved World of Podkin One Ear and The Carnival of the Lost. He is a recipient of the coveted Blue Peter Best Story Prize. So, Kieran, can I just ask, you must be a Blue Peter badge holder.
I got one for winning the competition, yes. Yeah, but I didn't have... when I was a child, I always used to want one. I never got one, so I had to wait until I was about 40. But yeah, finally, I've got one.
And do you get a special one for winning the book prize?
No, just a bog standard one, unfortunately.
But that's one more than I've got. So,
Yeah, I was chuffed with it. I was super chuffed.
It's still hats off to you.
Thank you.
And Todd-Stanton, you'll know, is the creator of Brownstone's mythical collection, and the latest of those is Luna and the Treasure of Tlaloc, which is out this month in paperback, came out in hardback last year. But he's also the creator of picture books such as The Comet and some wonderful cover art as well, including the gorgeous cover for Matt Goodfellow's The Final Year. So we're going to be talking to Joe a little bit later, but we're so glad that you could join us because the illustrations are such an integral part of this book that we really couldn't do it without you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it was awesome to get a project that had so many illustrations in it. I think it was the most heavily illustrated book like this I've done. So yeah, it was awesome to be able to explore that.
And as we'll see a little bit later, it just makes the reading so accessible as well, particularly for those readers who may find the size of a book a bit outfacing. They can move quite rapidly through the book because there's lots of illustration to break up the text. I'm not saying that's the only reason it's there, but it does serve that function as well. So
Yeah,
I think we've got a little time lag there. So what I'll do, Joe, if you don't mind, I'm going to send you to the green room where you can have a cup of tea, and I'll have a quick chat with Kieran, and we'll bring you back in shortly to chat with us.
Perfect. All right, see you in a bit.
Mm-hmm. So Kieran, let's get stuck in then.
Yes.
I really enjoyed reading this story
Thank you.
on so many different levels, partly because I enjoy gaming of all kinds myself and play. And I noticed right at the beginning of the book, there's a dedication, and it says, "To Eli, Zerb would not exist without you." So I think there must be a bit of a story behind that dedication.
Yeah, so the entire book came about through my son, and it was during lockdown, the second lockdown, when we were doing homeschooling. And so I've got three children. He's the middle one. I think he was about 8 or 9 at the time, and he wasn't having a very good time with it at all. He was finding it a real struggle, and it just so happened that I had an empty slot in my schedule, and I was hoping to use it to come up with a new idea. And then lockdown happened. I was moaning to my agent about it, and she said, "Well, why don't you try writing a book with one of your children?" So I thought it'd be a good thing to do with Eli, to kind of give him a bit of a project that wasn't, the work was being set by his teacher. So we sat down basically, and I used him as a test subject really, because I've done everything, as you can imagine, everything you can do, you're told to do to encourage your child to read. I mean, there's books everywhere in the house, and he sees me reading and writing, and I've read stories to him. But when he got to about 8, 9, he lost interest, and gaming took over, and he loves sport and things like that as well. So I kind of used him as a test subject really, of how can I draw him back and write a book that he loved to read. So there were two things that we've been doing during lockdown that were keeping us sane. I don't like soccer. He loves soccer, but I like American football, and he likes it too. So we've been watching the NFL, and I noticed how he was obsessed with all the different teams and the points they got and how they moved up and down the leagues and things like that. And also we were playing Dungeons and Dragons on Zoom. My brother was trapped in his flat in London on his own. I had a friend trapped in a flat in Cardiff on his own. So every Sunday afternoon we got together and played Dungeons and Dragons on Zoom. So I just thought, well, let's put those two ideas together. Let's have a world where going into dungeons and finding loot and beating monsters is a national sport. Yeah, and I just use him as an example of trying to get in all the gaming aspect, all the leveling up and all the points and leagues and scores and things like that, all the things that kind of fascinate him, and put it in book form.
Fabulous. I think maybe we need to tell people who are watching a little bit about the story. I wonder if you can set it up for us.
It's set in a world called Zerb. When my son was about 4, that was his imaginary world he created. He had a little flag. I bet it was his bedroom, but he had a flag on his bedroom and things like that. So we used that as the world. And in Zerb, the national sport is dungeon running. So they have these bats called iBats that can film it all, and they beam it onto these crystals, and it's like a sports program. And there are teams. They have to go into dungeons, and you have to have 3 members on the team. You have a fighter, a healer, and a mage who can do all the magic spells and things. And there's different teams and different leagues, and you go into a dungeon, and it's a race to finish the dungeon first, but also you get points for beating the boss and finding the special loot in the dungeon. And then at the end, all the points get totted up, and you see who comes first, second, third, fourth.
I'm just looking at the chat, and Kelly says it reminds her of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that something that you played as well?
I've never played that one. I think that's a card game, isn't it? It's a bit like Pokemon cards, I think. Yeah, I know of it, but I've never actually played it, no.
I wonder if we could start with a little bit of the book next.
Yes. Okay. So the first bit I'm going to read, this is from near the beginning. So the hero is a guy called Kit, and he is what's called a North. So he's part gnome, part dwarf, and he's obsessed with dungeon running. He dreams of becoming a dungeon runner, and he's in the kind of the inn down the end of his road, watching the screen. And he's got a friend called Kliku, who's a little gobrot. He's teeny tiny, and there's a horrible bully called Breg who lives next door, and he makes Kit's life a nightmare. And Breg is just about to throw Kit and his friend out of the inn where they're watching the dungeon running. Kliku peered between Kit's fingers and opened his mouth to say squeak. But before he could say anything, Breg's meaty hand clamped down on him, ripping him from Kit's grasp. I said, get out into the street, Breg shouted, and hurled poor tiny Kliku out of the inn door. There's a picture of him flying through the air. Kliku, Kit shouted and dashed after him. He ran into the street, just in time to see his little friend splash down in a muddy puddle and begin flailing his tiny arms, trying to swim. As fast as he could, Kit ran over and scooped the gobrot up. He patted Kliku on his back, very gently, in case he had swallowed muddy water. Kliku coughed and spluttered and began to shout some very angry things in the gobrot language, when he was interrupted by a chorus of laughter. Breg was standing at the inn door with his 2 friends, the Lumber Sisters, pointing and hooting as if it was the funniest thing in all of Zerb. See, Breg said, in between chortles, I told you that babies belonged in the street. The inn is for proper dungeon runners like us. You're not a runner, Kit shouted. You couldn't get through a dungeon if it was made of paper and you had a pair of scissors. Oh, yeah? Breg took a step into the street and placed his fists on his hips. Well, we'll show you, because we're going to enter the dungeon trial and we're going to win, aren't we? Breg's 2 friends, Nora and Dora, nodded and smirked. They looked so smug that Kit found himself shouting back before he really knew what he was doing. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm going to show you, because I'm entering the dungeon trial as well, and I'm going to win.
Well, I don't think that was a very wise thing for him to do. Kieran, I could imagine you in your classroom. You were a teacher once upon a time. I bet you enjoyed reading aloud to your class.
I loved it, yeah. So I taught reception. We read 2 or 3 storybooks a day. Yeah, we did all the voices and everything, and had puppets and all sorts. It was great.
Just looking at the chat again, and Kelly came back to us about the Yu-Gi-Oh comment and just said it also has dragons and mages. Also, one of my favourite games of all time has mages in it, and that's Final Fantasy.
Oh yeah, I used to play those games. Yeah, I love them. They're amazing, aren't they? I think it's all of fantasy. I think it was Terry Pratchett said it was like a big soup bowl, and all the different fantasy authors and obviously games and everything get chucked in and then mixed around, and then authors come along and take bits out. So I think there's bits of influence from everything there. Obviously, it all comes from Tolkien as well, doesn't it?
A great favourite of yours, I think.
Yes, definitely. Well, The Hobbit was the book that kind of turned me into a fantasy geek when I was a boy. Yeah.
And from what I've read, it was the map that was one of the things that really excited you. And I'm pleased to say there's a map in your book as well.
Of course, yeah. I always start all my books off. That's the first thing I do actually is sit down and draw the map. Yeah, this one I did with my son actually. Children love making maps and putting all the names and places and things on there. So we had a great time sitting down and making this map together.
I love that. I can understand why the map making probably had greater attraction for him than sitting down and writing the story with his dad, but because it's almost a playful thing in itself, isn't it, to create a map together? Because you're inventing stories in your head as you're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I do quite a lot of workshops with children where we make maps and they love it. And, and you can hear them as they're drawing the map, they're building up the story in their head. And some of them, by the end of it, they have like a 5-book series planned out.
Mm. I wonder if you talk us through your map. Tell us about some of the places on there.
Well, the first book takes place in Grotville, which is in the middle. And that's like a very run-down town where Kit lives and his friends live. It's not the most glamorous of places. And then all the rest of the areas are places which are going to come into the story as the series progresses. But you've got the main bit there is a big kind of line going down the middle called the Rend, and that's the kind of split in the world where magic is seeping through, and that's the source of all the magic in Zerb. And that's like the backstory behind the whole dungeon running, which is going to emerge as the series progresses. So I've got the web where the creatures called Spidlings live, who are like half human, half spiders. I've got Cloud Roost, which is where the Birdkin live, who are people who are like humanoid birds. And then there's lots of elves in the world. So the elves, they have like several cities and they all live around the side there, the eastern side. Yeah, so we had a great time on Prickleton, where the Prickleton porkers come from. It was amazing. Yeah, the best part was making up all the names and putting it all together.
I could really tell that you'd had fun with that. And we're going to talk about some of those characters in a moment. But before we do that, I think we have to talk about the three main characters, and they appear on Joe's front cover here. So we know about Kit, but who are the other two characters?
So yeah, Kit ends up saying he's going to enter this hero trial, but he doesn't have a team. So yes, the first thing he has to do is find a team. So he finds another North like him called Sandy, and her ambition when she grows up is to become a sea hag. So she's the mage. At the start, obviously, this is a kind of like the very, very beginning of their career as dungeon runners. They're not very good, any of them. Kit's only got a wooden sword and shield, for example. Sandy only knows one spell, and that's she can make tiny sandcastles. And the healer is actually a vampire, but he's a vegan vampire called Thorn, and he's turned away from drinking blood and decided to become a healer and use his knowledge of the human body to put it to good use and save people instead of drinking their blood.
He does find it hard to stay on the straight and narrow, though.
Yeah, there's the spidlings that are in the story, the kind of little spider people. That's like his weakness. Like for most vegetarians, it's bacon, isn't it? That kind of lures them back into eating meat. But for him, he can't resist the taste of a spidling.
Mm. So those are our three characters, and they're unlikely heroes, really. I'd like to know a little bit more about the other teams that they go up against. This reminded me a little bit about, I'm showing my age again, it reminded me of the cartoon Wacky Racers.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Yeah.
So who have we got in the teams that they're going up against?
This is where I'm going to get confused with all the other books now. So in the first one, there's Breg's team, the total champions. So that's Breg and the two bullies that make Kit's life a nightmare. They've got a team. There's the Prickleton Porkers, who are hedge pigs. They're like humanoid hedgehogs. There's the Spidling team that Thorn has to try and resist eating. And there's a dwarf team as well.
I will just say that total champions is spelt toe, Toetal, champions. They're not that great at spelling, are they?
Yeah, they're not the sharpest tools in the box.
One of the other things are the cards, like the Pokemon cards, which give you the different ratings. And although our heroes are the unlikely heroes, they all do quite well on the clever rating.
When they start off, they don't have any equipment or any powers and things. So they start off quite low, but they need to have something that gives them an edge. So the thing that helps them get through the dungeon is basically they're all very small, but they're quite clever, and they use their intelligence to beat the more powerful teams, and also their teamwork and each other's talents have to come together. I like characters that kind of have a bit of a struggle, so nothing's easy for them. They've got to use what they've got and use it in kind of innovative and new ways to try and succeed.
So once you've got your map, and your world and your characters. What happens next for you in the writing process?
So I'm a bit of a planner. So there's different types of writers. There's planners and ones that plan it out and ones that fly by the seat of their pants. I tend to plan it quite carefully, especially with dungeon runners where you're thinking about kind of points and who's going to win and how. I'm not very good at maths, so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how can I get them to have so many points. Then when I had a rough plan, I sat down and wrote the first draft. And then things got shifted around quite a lot as I was writing. So I like to be quite fluid as well, but I like to have it kind of quite planned out. And obviously, there's a structure to the dungeons. There's a puzzle and there's a boss and there's a bit of a scene at the end. So you kind of slot those in as well.
I think one of the things that fascinates me about this kind of fantasy is that it seems to be both future facing and past orientated all in one go. I mean, they don't go to a pub, they go to an inn. And yet
Yeah.
it's highly digital as well.
Yeah, it's got the kind of classic fantasy, inns and dwarves and elves and things like that, but also the crystals, and it's being shown on a screen, and there's sponsors and things that come into it later on. So combining fantasy with the world of sport, really, the modern world of sport.
Mm. I think what I'm going to do is bring Joe in and we can have a look at your sketches and his illustrations. And then I think we've got some other images as well, which will give us a chance to talk about some of the episodes from the story without, of course, giving away the ending. So thanks for coming back and joining us again, Joe. I hope you weren't too relaxed in the green room with your cup of tea.
It was great. I actually hadn't heard a few of those things about the book, so it was really lovely.
And so we're going to start by just having a quick look at some of Kieran's sketches and ask him to talk those through. We've talked a little bit about the map, but I'm guessing that this one we're looking at here was the original map that you created with your son. Is that right?
Yeah, that's our version. I drew in our Dungeon Runner's notebook. Yeah, you can see some of the pencil bits and stuff like that. Yeah, so that went to Joe, and Joe did his amazing version that appears in the final book.
But Joe, you stuck pretty closely to that map.
Yeah, I think especially because it was something that Kieran and his son had done together. It was such an important part of the creation of the entire story that I was never going to try and do it a disservice and change anything. I think the rift, this crack of magic, I thought that was really a really interesting concept, so it was great to illustrate.
Tell us a bit more about that rift, Kieran.
It comes into it more as the story progresses, but it's like a big tear in the kind of almost the fabric of reality, and there's magic seeping through. So all the dungeons in Dungeon Runners were made by this wizard called Noctis, and that's where he was last seen, like hundreds of years ago, disappearing into this rend, and then he vanished. So there's a kind of a mystery to be revealed about what the rend is and what's happening there. But the kind of magic seeps out, so that's where the creatures that live around it are all very fantastic. That's where the spiddlings come from, and there's some more that come through. There's ones that are called the Unthread, who are kind of living balls of wool and stuff like that are all kind of been affected by the magic seeping out from it.
These are some of your original sketches for the characters.
I like doodling. Before I start writing the characters, I often sit down and just sketch them out. I think it's because I'm quite a visual. I like to see things first before I start writing. This is Kit, but I had an idea that as the story progressed, he would level up, which is one of the things that my son loved about gaming, is the fact that your characters progress and they get more powerful as they go on. This was Kit on his way up to becoming a more powerful dungeon runner. So I did a few pictures of him in stages as he went through. And this is Sandy. Yeah, some ideas I had for Sandy the Mage. And you could just see behind her there's some crabs there because she's got a little pet crab called Mr. Pinchy. So I was just doodling some crabs that she might have with her as like a kind of familiar.
Did you have conversations about these sketches?
Definitely, yeah. I was sent the sketches, which is really amazing because normally you don't really get this much kind of visual input at the start. So it was really cool to already see like some of the characters taking shape and have something to jump off from, and to get a feel of the world that Kieran was imagining was really helpful for me. I especially love the idea of having familiars and a cat or some kind of animal, having an animal that's themed around your magic. I think is such a nice kind of new idea. Normally you just have frog, toad, owl kind of thing, but yeah, to have this kind of mage that makes sandcastles and has a crab familiar was really nice.
The sandcastles is brilliant. But where did the idea for the crab come from, Kieran?
I think I was just doodling like here, and obviously did it with some crabs around. And yeah, I like to have like a like a cute animal sidekick. And I think children really like that as well. Often when you speak to them about what's their favourite part of the story, they'll say, oh, it's the cat or the dog or something that you didn't expect. Oh, this
And
was
this,
Thorn the vampire, yes. A couple of ideas for what he might look like.
Joe, talk us through some of the next slides.
So this, I think, was one of the very first kind of rough sketches. We were having a conversation before the event where I was talking about the fact that I'm really brutal with sketchbooks and not hoarding things, and I've been trying to find some of my original sketches for the gang. And this is one that I came across. It's a really like loose, I think it is an illustration that happens at a certain point in the book, but it was just kind of me getting an idea of the proportions of the characters, because obviously Thorn being a vampire kind of slightly towers above Kit and Sandy, which I quite liked, and trying to decide on their outfits. Obviously, because it's book one, I'm drawing Kit his kind of level 0 self. So I think it's going to be so fun as the books progress to work my way towards this illustration that Kieran has shown you guys already. I did manage to find, I think this might be an early, I don't know if you guys can see that, an early, try, and that might be an early Breg. And then I think you can see here is a Kit. And then I also found there should be a Thorn somewhere in here, slightly different from the final version. But the problem is that all my sketchbooks get completely lost in just doodles. So to actually kind of track down the origins of any idea is picking a insane knot that it's just kind of impossible.
So these are the same 3 characters. What I
Yeah.
notice here is that they haven't got their arms linked and she hasn't got her crab with her.
Oh, you can see, because it's a very rough sketch, but it's this circle next to her shoulder, I think, is a very, very rough sketch of Mr. Pinchy. But yeah, he's kind of lost in her hair, which I thought was quite a nice thing to have her hair coming down, and then when he's a bit scared, he can scuttle away inside, depending on what's happening. I think Kit is obviously the leader and has to try and put a brave face on things, but you can really see how the other two are questioning their life choices at this point.
So interesting listening to you talk about how this series is going to progress and that the characters have got to level up. Obviously, you're not going to give away any secrets, but how far on in the series are you in terms of the writing and the illustrating?
I've written the first 4 books, which is like the first block, and the second book is edited, and I think Joe's definitely done the roughs.
Yeah, I was working on the illustrations today, actually.
Cool. Excellent.
They're on their way.
The cover's amazing. I've seen the cover; is incredible.
Okay, before we leave our 3 heroes, here's a question for both of you. Which would you prefer to be? A fighter, a mage, or a healer?
It's got to be mage. I'd love the idea that I was brave enough to be a fighter, but I don't think I've quite got it in me. So I feel like a mage, you can like get involved in the battles, but nice kind of arms distance. I guess depending on what your powers are. But yeah, a mage would be cool.
Yeah, also I think I would be a very rubbish fighter. And I also couldn't be a healer because I'm not very good with blood and needles and things like that. I get very squeamish and almost faint. So I'd have to be a mage as well.
Okay, well, I'll be the fighter. So our team will have 2 mages and 1 fighter. How about that?
Good. Yeah, we'll hide behind you.
Oh, this is quite interesting because doesn't this image appear on a page that has a black background?
So this was an early sketch of Kit, but it was definitely probably playing with shadows because I knew that they were going to be a big part in the book. There's a whole section that we've figured out where the team end up in this kind of dark area in complete pitch black, and we wanted to show that through the illustrations. So this was definitely me playing with shadows at that point.
And does it present any particular challenges to have an illustration that's going to be on a completely black page?
I really love anything with intense shadows. I've always loved painters like Caravaggio and people that use that chiaroscuro technique. So I think the opportunity to do a black background, it was something I've probably been waiting for ages. I wish more books had black pages. It'd probably helped me out.
Talk us through these different cover designs.
So this was just trying to come up with the initial cover roughs to send to Kieran and the editor. And they were so fun to do because I love how so many adventure stories you have the hero proudly facing off against evil, but the tone of this first book is more the fact that they're so in over their head in this situation. So it was really fun to draw this like gang of three just completely lost in this huge dungeon. And then any excuse to draw monsters is always great. So in each design, I try to include as many monster ideas as humanly possible, including some of the ones that are going to be in this book.
So the one on the left is the one that's closest to the finished image. The three characters facing out of the cover rather than running along the page. What might have been the decisions behind going with that image?
I'm not sure. I guess it was nice to have them central to the book cover. I think it was nice to show how completely overwhelmed they were with the situation. I think the final cover really shows the size of them compared to the challenge they're about to face. I definitely think they made the right choice. I don't know if you were involved in picking the cover, Kieran.
Yeah, I got sent all the different versions. I remember looking at definitely having them in the centre and making them bigger and looking at the different colours.
I notice also, though, Joe, that you've done some different lettering. So did you do the lettering for the front cover as well?
I think it was a collaboration in the end. I'm really like trying to theme as much as possible, but there's always a problem with readability versus design. I think originally I really wanted to use the early Disney kind of medieval lettering, but I think because you don't really get the aspect of the fact that it's this sport, like you said earlier, it has this semi kind of future facing and backwards facing. I think it was nice that in the end we decided to go for a kind of more modern typeface to reflect that.
I've got some slides here, some of your favourite images from the book.
I just picked this because I really love this character. I'm sure Kieran will explain his story a little bit, but I just thought it was such a cool concept for the book, and I like any excuse to draw a cluttered house, you know, all these kind of different bits of kind of magic and old books and things.
It's one of the things that I love in your picture books as well. The comic has got so many things to look at in the room. I love that about your pictures.
Oh, thank you.
Kieran, tell us a bit about this character. He's the grandfather, isn't he, of Kit?
Yes, this is Kit's grandfather. Back in his day, he was a famous dungeon runner. So that's where Kit's ambition comes from. He wants to be famous like his grandfather. And he was a mage, and he was called Clot the Lime Green. And he was one of the top ranked dungeon runners. But now he's retired, and he just wants to eat soup all day and nap.
So this is quite early on in the story. And Joe, why did you choose this picture?
I think I love the idea of Kit possibly seeing an idea of his future self, this kind of grizzled character that was once a dungeon runner, and having that juxtaposition of youth and cynicism.
Oh, interesting. We're getting a bit deep, aren't we? This is where Kit's going to sign up to become a dungeon runner. And then two of my favourite illustrations here. What a fantastic boss monster. Kieran, just tell us what the boss monster is in this story.
So it's basically like a giant kind of blob of green jelly or slime, which grows out tentacles. And you can see here that he's absorbed one of the other teams. The hedge pigs, the Prickleton Porkers, they've been like sucked inside, and they're trapped inside the body of this great big jelly thing.
Joe, I would imagine this is quite a hard monster to draw because by its very nature, a blob of jelly doesn't have many distinguishing features.
Yeah, but I think that's what made it so fun, because then you can completely go into your imagination, and it was so great to work out how his mouth would move because there's no real defined thing. It's just this slimy, blobby opening that kind of absorbs anything that goes near it. And it was so fun to draw the bemused faces of the porkers kind of realizing they've been eaten, and you can still kind of see them floating around inside.
This is where the sandcastles come into their own.
Yes, this is when our heroes face off against the monster, and of course they don't have anything to beat him with. And then they realise that Sandy's magic spell of making tiny sandcastles might be useful after all. So they start making hundreds of them and just lobbing them at this slime creature and making it go all gungy and crusty, which it doesn't like.
We do have some questions coming in from our audience. Let's start with this one here. Sorry, Joe, you've disappeared, but it's only temporary. So, Kieran, do you want to take that one?
So, first of all, I think, especially with children's books, the names have got to be easily readable. There's nothing worse than having like really complicated. Fantasy is quite bad for having really overly complicated names that are very difficult to pronounce, especially like in adult fantasy books. They find it really annoying. But for children, it's going to take them out of the story if they're going to have to constantly sounding out the name. So short, punchy names. And I tried to encapsulate the characters in the sound of the name, if that makes sense. So especially Sandy, because she's a sea hag. And Thorn, my son actually came up with Thorn's name, which was quite cool. He sounds quite sinister. Also, his fangs are like thorns. And then Breg sounds like a good sort of bully name.
It's a good question. I love a good name. We've got another question from Kelly. Do we know the answer to this one?
Well, definitely 4 to start off with, and then hopefully, it depends on if anyone buys the book, but hopefully more.
We have got a quiz for everybody, haven't we? So here we are. Let's see how they get on with this. Tell us what this is all about.
So this is the puzzle from the story. They come to 3 doors, and each one has writing above it, and you can see the writing there. And they have to puzzle out. One of the doors is the door they need to take to get through to the finish line, and the other 2 have quite nasty consequences. So which door would you pick?
I have opened a poll, and it would be great if you could tell us, should they go through door number 1, should they go through door number 2, or should they go through door number 3? What do you think? Okay, we've got some answers coming in. I couldn't get a round room, Kieran. I could only get 3 doors.
They look great.
My licensed images, that's all I could find. It's in a circular room, isn't it?
I think so, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay, I'm going to count down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Oh, it's changing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here are our results. So 42% think it should be door number 2. That's the winner. And it's split equally between door 1 and door 3 with 28% each. Are they right?
No, because if you look at the words, this is a good point for teaching actually. The lines on them are lines of symmetry. So if you think about reflecting the letter over the line of symmetry, you'll see the first one spells out death. So if you pick that one, you died.
Oh dear, 28% of people are dead.
The second one, if you reflect the letters, it says back. So that takes you right back to the start of the dungeon.
42% of people, they've got to go back to the start.
Yeah, and the last one, if you reflect those letters, it says win. So that takes you through to the finish line.
Excellent. So 28% of you're winners. So now you know. I'm just going to see if we've got any more questions. We do. So here we have one from Roy.
Fantasy, I think, is definitely my favourite genre to illustrate, and luckily I've had the opportunity to do that with this series. It's the same as what Kieran was talking about earlier. Ever since I was a kid, I've always loved reading fantasy and fantasy illustration, animation, video games, and are completely absorbed by that kind of world. And I'm exactly the same, and The Hobbit was my introduction. And I remember reading it with my mum and just having that moment where they finally leave the Shire and go on their adventure. It's probably changing my brain chemistry forever and falling in love with adventure stories.
And can I ask you, what kinds of games are you playing now?
I've started playing Elden Ring, but I'm so completely out of the gaming loop that it's incredibly soul-destroying and I'm not getting anywhere. I don't know if either of you have tried to play that, but that's very difficult.
I haven't. What kind of game is it?
It's a kind of Dungeons and Dragons-y type game. There's a series called Dark Souls, and it's actually partially written by George R.R. Martin of Game of Thrones fame. But I think it's for gamers that have a lot more free time to get good at gaming.
What about you, Kieran?
My children love gaming, so I play with them quite a lot. Tend to play Minecraft, and we tend to go on the creative thing and build massive villages and towns and things like that. And I've also just started playing Baldur's Gate 3, which is amazing. I've spent far too many hours on that. I should be writing, actually.
We've got one more question from Sam. This one's for you as well, Joe.
I love sketching. Like, I just keep endless sketchbooks, so working in black and white is probably the closest I kind of get to that feeling of just being able to sketch. It feels less intense, more kind of freeing. So yeah, I think black and white is my favourite.
Really, because one of the things that I love about Brownstone is that the colours are so intense, and I'm thinking particularly about Luna. They're so rich and gorgeous, the colours in that book.
Yeah, I guess I've got to thank my printer. But yeah, I think I'm always trying to learn about colour because I feel a bit lost in it, but hopefully that's really nice to hear. I feel like I'm getting better as I use it more.
Fantastic. So look, it looks as though we're coming towards the end of our event, and Kieran has said that he's going to read us out and with a great piece of action. So it's going to give us all an appetite, I think, for reading a little bit more of this series. So before he does that, can I just thank you, Joe, very much for joining us this evening. Kieran, thank you also. And great thanks to Nosy Crow for setting this up. And a huge thanks to the audience for joining us. So, Kieran, it's going to be over to you.
Cool. Right. So this is when Kit and his team are in the dungeon, and they're taking part in the dungeon run, and they've just tumbled into a room where there's some of these spiddlings that Thorn likes to eat, and there's a treasure chest in the middle of the room, and Kit's seen it, and he realizes that's where the loot is that he has to get. Kit looked up to see the remaining spiddling pause on its way to the chest. If it got there before him, the Witherweb Wanderers would still get 2 points, even if 2 of their players are out of action. Can I make it in time? Kit thought. The spiddling was closer, but Kit had longer legs. If he sprinted, he might just make it. The spiddling must have realised the same thing at the exact same time. It began to scuttle towards the chest as fast as its tiny legs would carry it. Kit launched himself forwards. His feet pounded the floor as he put every scrap of energy he had into the fastest dash he could manage. Faster, 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 he told himself. He imagined the eye bats beaming the scene out to crystals all over Zerb in slow motion, showing him drawing level with the spiddling, and then, just in the nick of time, inching ahead with his arms stretched as far as they could go. Kit felt his fingers touch the chest a fraction of a second before the spiddling's flailing legs did. The lid flipped open, releasing a cloud of green smoke that gushed out to fill the chamber. The voice of Noctis boomed throughout the dungeon. Treasure found, 2 points awarded. That's a picture of the treasure chest opening. I did it, Kit shouted. I got the treasure. In all the thousands of times he had imagined this moment, none of them matched how good it actually felt to score some dungeon points. Even if Triple Trouble didn't win the trial, at least they wouldn't be coming last with a big fat 0. There were whoops and cheers from the Gobrots and Sandy. Kit might even have shouted a bit himself. The green smoke began to clear, and he looked into the open chest. It held a metal helmet with a nose guard and a crest of studs up the middle. A label was attached to it, which read, Helmet of Ogre Skin. A proper fighter's helmet, Kit whispered. With trembling hands, he picked it up and lowered it onto his head. At first, it sank over his eyes like somebody had dropped a giant bucket on him, but it instantly began to shrink until it fitted his head perfectly. He felt a tingle all over his body, as if he had been coated in an invisible layer of shielding. Ogre skin. The helmet had made him tougher, just like a real dungeon runner. And there he is. It's Joe's amazing picture of him in his new helmet.